You're listening to Industry Talks on Design in Focus, a new multimedia channel serving CID. CID, Creative, Innovation and Design. Listen to representatives, practitioners and leaders on topics like industry development, skills, methods, movements, tools, concepts, projects, events, and much more. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Industry Talks on Design in Focus. Today I'm speaking with Robert Kozma, and we'll be discussing his new book, Make the World a Better Place, Design with Passion, Purpose, and Values. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Candice. Thanks for having me on your program.
It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm very excited to talk about your book. I think it's very relevant, very hot, especially if you look at other developments in the industry as well, which relates to it. So, can you start by introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about your history and how we get to the book today?
Sure. Well, that's kind of a long story because I'm going on in age, so to speak. So I've been around the block several times. I'm currently retired. I have a title of Emeritus Principal Scientist at SRI International, which is an R&D institute in Silicon Valley. But I retired from there actually quite a long time ago. I started my career as a primary school teacher many, many years ago. After I received my PhD, I was a professor at the University of Michigan and a research scientist there. I was there for 20 years and then moved to Silicon Valley to SRI and worked there as a principal scientist. I headed up a research center, the Center for Technology and Learning, for a while. And then when I retired from there, I was a consultant for 14 years, an international consultant. And when I retired, I was trying to figure out what to do with all this extra time. And on the one hand, was thinking about doing something totally different, which was an old hobby of mine, photography. And on the other hand, writing a book on that kind of basically looked at my experience as a researcher and designer. And I thought, well, I'll do something totally different. So I was a photographer for about 6 years, actually a fashion photographer. And I really enjoyed that, had a lot of fun doing it, which I guess is what you're allowed to do when you're retired. But it was kind of fluff. It was, I was shooting photographs of beautiful women in beautiful gowns and having fun. But in the back of my mind, it was, I should be writing this book. And so eventually I picked up on that and decided that, okay, I should be writing this book. And it is a book about design. I've always considered myself a designer, even when I was a primary school teacher. I was always thinking about innovative ways to teach and considered that design. I had this notion that design is not a kind of specific category of people, just like product designers or software designers or fashion designers, but that pretty much all professionals are designers in one way or another. So when I was a teacher, I was designing lesson plans. When I was a professor, I was designing graduate courses, and as a researcher, I was designing research studies. As a consultant, I was working with multinational organizations, high-tech companies, ministries of education, designing policy that use technology to improve education and prepare students for the knowledge economy and the information society. So design has always been a focus, and that is the focus of the book.
Right, that's very interesting. I think there are so many conversations going around design, and you know, in my own field, which is experience design. So you get CX, UX, all types of X's. And if you look into UX, user experience design, within the user experience designers, the actual field, they can't agree on what an experience designer is. So I think design it can be quite a broad term. And, I think you're pretty right in that design has got an element of creativity in it. And so I would say like applied logical creativity is what design is. So I can sort of see how that ties into what you're saying. Can you talk a little bit about what you're talking about in the book? I was supposed to receive it already. I have not received it yet, so I have not been able to read it. Really want to and looking forward to receiving it. But yeah, can you walk us through what making the world a better place is and how design could be useful for that?
Sure. Well, first of all, you should be getting your book any day now. I have heard from other people that I've been sending the books out to that they've already received it. So maybe even today. Well, I guess tomorrow, given this is late your time. But
Yeah,
at any rate,
international post,
it should be soon. Well, actually, one of the chapters, the second chapter of the book, is what is design, and I build off of the work of Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, who many decades ago wrote quite a famous book called "Sciences of the Artificial." And he approaches design in this kind of very general way, which I use in the book as the definition that I build other chapters on, which is anyone is a designer who engages in activities intended to move from the current situation to a preferred situation. So it's a design as a process, and it's a kind of general problem solving process that here we are in this current situation. It's not quite, or maybe not at all, like what we want it to be, but we're going to move to a preferred situation, a preferred condition. How do we do that? So that is the design challenge. And it involves looking at a purpose. What is the purpose of our design? What's the process? How do we get there? What's the outcome or the product of our design? It's a product or a service or an experience. And what's the impact? So that's kind of the model that I use as the core of the book. But the primary focus of the book is that preferred outcome. What are the preferred outcomes that we have? What makes the world a better place? And that's kind of the overarching preferred outcome that I kind of talk about. That is, what constitutes a better place. And so I have a chapter on titled "The Moral Foundations for Design," because if we're talking about better or good, we need to be talking about what the moral values are, what the ethical principles are for design. So it's very central to the whole book of, and the title or the subtitle is Design with Passion, Purpose, and Values. And values are an important core to that. So I actually dig into a number of philosophers that talk about the good, and come up with 7 principles that I use as a basis for what I call good design. Now, good design is a term that we use often in the design profession. This is a good design, that's a good design. And usually we're referring to the object or the product of the design, looking at the features of the design, the outcome of the design. Is it its look and feel or functionality or aesthetics? But given the model that I use for the design process, I focus on the impact. That a good design is only good to the extent that it has a good impact. So this comes back to this kind of moral discussion. What are the principles for good design when we're looking at good impact?
Yeah, I had an event earlier this year called Design for Good Ethics in AI, where I collaborated with ladies at UX, and we were hosted at PwC. And we had an interactive discussion panel on ethics in AI. And I also went and I wrote an article about it where I tried to discover, I wrote like crap load about ethics. And I think it's such a complicated topic, right? Like getting to the core of ethics, of responsibility, of good can be quite, yeah, can be quite challenging because aside from how complicated it is, there's also ways that people sometimes exploit it in a certain way. So you'll get awarded as the best designer ever for designing a nuclear bomb.
Yes,
And you
right.
get an award. So
Right.
the context is also on top of the everything else, the context can also influence it. So it's quite complicated. Do you talk about that in your book? And do you have ideas on?
Yes. Again, let me approach your question this way. Um, uh, in the 3rd chapter, in this kind of moral foundations chapter, I do come up with these principles, but this is a kind of it's not these principles are not presented as commandments, but rather as discussion starters, as values that we need to talk about.
Yeah,
Talk about both in general, but also specifically. And I'll
yeah.
come back to that in a moment. So what these principles are a kind of foundation for discussions. The first principle is do no harm. The second principle is is address harm when you see it. And so these are our primary moral obligations that we need to be talking about. What is the harm that we might come from our designs? Or what is the harm that's out there that we need to design for? And this is particularly relevant when you talk about artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and the kind of harm that these products might result in, the kind of harmful impacts that as good as these designs are in terms of the way they function and so on, they're only good to the extent that they have good impacts, as I mentioned before. And harm is not a good impact. So those are the first two principles that we need to be talking about. The other principles are more positive, and they are increase happiness and well-being. Another one is advance knowledge, reasoning, and agency. The fifth is promote equality. The sixth is address injustice. And the seventh is build positive, supportive, compassionate relationships in communities. So these are the values. These are the principles that I promote, that I put forward as the discussions that we need to be having as we create our designs. And as I said, the discussions need to be general. For example, we need to, in the design community, we need to be talking about the harm that could come from AI or social media or whatever. They also need to be local. That is, in a particular design, with a particular user group or a particular community that we're working with, we need to have this discussion around harm, around well-being, around equality, justice, community building, knowledge, and agency. So there's an approach to design that I offer or promote in the book that I call design as a moral discussion among co-creators. So there are two aspects to this, that from the very beginning, we're talking about values in our designs. And we're talking about co-creation. We're creating values, we're creating designs with values and impacts with the community that we're designing. So key to all of this is what is a distinction Don Norman makes between designing for and designing with. So it's a much more participatory notion of co-design, a notion that I think is really much more prevalent, much more common in Europe, and particularly Scandinavian countries, and almost alien in the US, that design is done in design studios, and you have this kind of team of designers that talk to each other and come up with great ideas and then develop these products and hand them off to their clients and so on. And even human-centered designers, human-centered design agencies, they'll go out and involve user groups. focus groups and so on. But then they bring those ideas back into the studio and
Mm-hmm.
create this product. They may go back out to the field and try it out and see what the users think, but then they go back to the studio and hand it off to their clients. And that's not really the idea that I'm promoting in the book. It's much more participatory.
Yeah. So the image that comes to mind, since you are an educator and a scientist, when you're doing science, excuse my lack of vocabulary here, and when you're performing science experiments, you usually report or you collect the data and you analyze the data repetitively, and then you forward science that way. While as what I think you're saying, design is not that way. We don't forward design with our collective understanding. Instead, we all profit of it singularly.
Right, exactly. And in fact, using science as an example or a contrast, even science is moving in this direction. That is, rather than a an activity that's kind of apart from what it is that you're investigating, there's much more a interaction between the study that you're doing and who it is that you're studying,
Hmm.
and the product that results from this
Yeah.
study, and how useful the product is to the people that you're studying.
Hmm.
So this applies obviously much more in the social sciences than in the physical sciences, where you can still have this kind of traditional notion of science as an objective, detached kind of activity. Uh,
Yeah.
Even there's qualifications, but of the process. But in social sciences, it's moving much more to this kind of participatory, interactive notion of the scientific process and the products that it creates.
Very, very interesting. I once had a role as a digital designer where I was designing products which use dark design methods to basically clickbait people. And for the organization, that was good design. The your worth as a designer was the output, and so when you're serving your stakeholders, your who pay your salary, um, the question of like design for a good outcome. Who are we designing a good outcome for? For our bosses or for humanity? And so I think that is quite a good or an important aspect for designers to look at. How do you balance business and the customer? Because, yeah, a lot of people will just design to keep the business happy, and it's a fact of life. They need to pay their bills, they need to survive, they have to do it until they find a new job, or that sort of thing. So it can be quite limiting. And then on top of that, I think this saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I've seen that through my life quite a lot, especially when I've had good intentions as well. And then somehow I mess things up because, yeah, the intention was good, but the understanding was not yet developed enough. And so, like you were saying, having those conversations is really, really important. And then having a a source where we combine all of that understanding so that we can create learnings and apply that in the long run across the board in various sectors could be an interesting route to go. Do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, it's really an important question, especially for individuals who are kind of stuck in a particular situation. Um, and the book addresses the individual readers. That's what books do, of course. You're reading by and large as an individual activity. But what I try to do is create a systemic uh, view of design, how design fits into kind of the overarching structure of our economy and our world. um, uh, I mean, if we think of design as having any chance of making the world a better place, and we can think of world in a very local way, which we often do and should do. But if we also think of it in this kind of grander way of society and the physical world, the physical our climate and environment and so on, we need to think systemically. How does what we do fit into the bigger picture? And how does the bigger picture, the bigger system need to change if we're going to have a better world? So I look at design both in this micro way of, you know, if you're sitting down at your desk and thinking about a particular design, a particular problem, how do you work that through? And then also from this grand perspective of as designers, as an individual that's part of a profession, that's part of an industry, that's part of a society, how is it that we interact with each other and as a profession act collectively to make changes that will improve the world?
Yeah.
And so I look at it at three levels: a micro level, this macro level, and then what I call a community level.
Yeah.
And I build a lot on another Nobel laureate, Eleanor Ostrom, who's done a lot of work on community governance.
Yeah.
And she's come up with design principles. She's passed away, but the principles are still very relevant. And I only discovered her incidentally in writing this book. I'd never heard of her. She got her Nobel Prize in economics, and her field is political science. And when I was doing a Google search of design principles, I came across her name, and I'm going like, who is this person? I've never heard of Eleanor Ostrom, and how is it that I've never heard of a person who has design principles?
Yeah.
And I was really very impressed by her work, and it's very community based. How it is that communities design their own solutions to problems, and then I began thinking about how it is that designers can help communities
Yeah.
solve their own problems.
Yeah. So I'm very much aligned with you. And if you look at Design in Focus, the platform has got areas that address a lot of this. So, your words really resonate with me. And actually, I have this one connection who I was going to help with his platform. He calls himself Public Happiness Andy, and he's building a platform to really help create more happiness. So I'm finding all of these people, and there are already a lot of conversations going. But the one limitation that's a hurdle that I always, like a blank wall that I'm always running into and just struggle to get over, is how do we enable these people? Like, for example, Eleanor, why you didn't hear about her? It's probably because there's not a lot of business, and I put business in quotes here, business sense in ethical actions, ethical design or responsible design. Since the rise of the industrial era, um, yeah, people have just become more and more profit driven, and so those who are working on the important matters are often suppressed. And so my main question always is, how do we enable designers to actually do? Because if you look around you, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I probably do. But just about everything around you has been created, innovated, and or designed. So our
Correct.
influence
Yes.
is massive, but our ability is limited due to working to briefs and having to comply to business rules and all of that. And so I really think that is one thing that I'd like to continue talking about. We are running out of time in this session. So yeah, I think for now I'd just like to say that there are lots of topics, lots of areas to discuss, and you know, we are looking into continuing this conversation. And yeah, I'd love for you to just maybe say a few things on that in the last 5 minutes, and then yeah, we
Sure.
take it from there.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, and it is something that I addressed in the book. That is that the context that we're working in is shaped very much by yet another Nobel Prize winner in economics, Milton Friedman, who has a doctrine. He's passed as well, of course, but the Friedman doctrine is his response to the idea that corporations have social responsibilities. And
Yes.
his response is that the only responsibility that corporations have is to their shareholders, and to make as much money as they can. And that had a huge impact in the U.S. And probably around the world, both in terms of corporations and governments. That was really a driver of government policy for a long time, is that to make the world better, you have policies that favor corporations. And then all of us have had to follow in line. Well, there is light that I can point to, and that is that a lot of corporations are beginning to adopt a stakeholder rather than a shareholder policy, which is this more inclusive, participatory approach to responsibility of corporations and how corporations are driven. Even the World Economic Forum is adopting and promoting this. I shouldn't say even. It's great that the World Economic Forum is taking a leadership role in this. But it's also the Business Roundtable in the US. There are a number of organizations and people that are promoting this idea. And I think designers as a profession need to push forward that notion. And that's the kind of thing that would empower us as designers to do good, to make the world a better place.
Sounds awesome. I really like the sound of that, Robert. So, for those listening, we are seeking to continue this conversation. Please reach out to Robert or myself and let us continue and build and see how far we can take that. And Robert, thank you so much for being here today and talking about your book. yeah, I want to continue for much longer because there's you're hitting word after word that just resonates with me, and yeah, it's thank you very much. I appreciate
Well,
it. And
thank you, Candice. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
if you've enjoyed listening to this session, please subscribe to us and follow us on social media. Visit designinfocus.org for more information and content. Design in Focus is a labor of love and can use any and all support. If you'd like to help keep us alive, please consider making a small donation.